the history of Cenphreus in embellished and romantic interpretations. Cenphreus, the goddess of fertility, smiled down at all who would gaze at her splendor, emanating through her captured likeness through vibrant lime-based plaster. Images of battles and orgies of mythic proportions encircled her perfect ethereal grass-green face in a collection of events that had turned Cenphreus into the planet the Doskers and their regal kin had risen to power on. Statues of the heroes and legends of their world stood against the walls under their respective visual documentation, their stone and iron-cast eyes viewing the gala like the watchful eyes of parents. Over half the room was coloured in the black-trimmed yellow and orange fashion of the Gosgolim house. Hints of the darkest navy blue were scattered throughout the room, establishing the presence of the Orcale spires. The burgundy and brown colours of the Helvenhull mountain tribe had placed themselves in the centre of the room, eagerly waiting to be approached by their adversaries for light conversation. The grey and white of House Slud disappeared against the walls and floor, their occasional movement revealing their attendance. All eyes found the three Doskers. Several faces from House Gosgolim laughed in their direction from across the room, while several others turned and snickered. Doria's vision blurred. She kept her gaze fuzzy while she forced a smile and continued into the room. Lorna broke away from the entrance, gradually vanishing into the crowd on the left. Doria tightened her throat, mimicking the feel of a sigh while shielding her true emotions from the room, carefully keeping any sign of weakness to herself. She proceeded slowly, walking with the poise of a crane through the murmuring crowd with Cram gliding behind her. The Gosgolim faction encompassed the entire opposite end of the room from where Doria stood. A forest of tall blondes adorned in the colours of a fiery pit stared in her direction, the promise of an attack warning her to remain aware. It had been 16 years since she had felt the specific tension she felt when facing her family's rivals. Back when she was only 2 years of age, a fully matured Cenphresan woman able to strike a regal pose next to her late father. She had recognized a few of the faces in the Gosgolim side of the room, some of whom had been a little older than a newborn, now full-grown and full of vigor. Every last of the young Gosgolims looked ready to floodless breathe with blood. One of the familiar faces stepped forward, a gentleman in a black and orange suit no more than 1 year older than herself. Doria remembered a moment once upon a time when the man was a boy an inch taller than she was. He had asked her to waltz in the very room they stood in once upon a time. Now he had sprouted, blossoming into a broad-shouldered wall of muscle that tapered neatly into a thin waist. She pondered how his muscle could be mistaken for bricks if she judged by the shape of his jaw and narrow nose. Only his eyes remained circular, and that was only the emerald spheres beneath the contents of his narrow almond-shaped lids. Bon Lai, Doria greeted with a slight curtsy bend at her knees. Darling Doria Doska. Bon Lai Gosgolim returned, his sharp smile resting comfortably across his olive-tanned skin. Doria couldn't help the smile that peeked out across her face. She felt her eyelids become heavy, retaining enough of her caution not to bat her eyelashes. Look at you, Bon Lai admired, letting his eyes trace her curves from her head to her feet. It wasn't difficult to imagine her slender Amazonian waist and legs under her elegant dress. And you, she complimented. It's hard to mistake those Gosgolim shoulders for anything else other than a blonde wall. They shared a chuckle. Bon Lai shrugged, bouncing Doria's vision from one side of his frame to the other. She bent a knee forward, hiding herself from his appeal. How is being a Duchess of House Doska? Treating me rather well. She nodded, brandishing her modesty. And a count, now, indeed, he confirmed, bowing and lifting his shoulders again. Oh, Cram, I'm terribly sorry. It's good to see you, too. The pleasure is mine, Your Excellency. Cram bowed in return, letting the younger man's attention return to his Duchess. And what privileges have Grand Duke Gosgolim bestowed upon his son? Doria inquired. Tax collection, manager of estates and military command, Bon Lai answered, his tone low and humble. Impressive. Doria leaned her hips toward her old friend for a moment, giving him an expression of her astonishment with a nod, a tight pinched frown, and high-ost eyebrows. Are your legions here? Tonight, yes, your grace." Count Bonlai waved his hand over his family's crowd. Most of the blonde heads turned in his direction as if they could feel his gesture to them. They kept their gaze on their count, waiting for an order, only resuming their business when he turned back around to Doria. The grand number of heads that had faced her made Doria bob her head for a moment, her lips flat and tight at the sight of her impending doom. "I suppose His Majesty's soldiers will be fighting for you, then?" Bonlai asked. "No." Doria shook her head. She could see Bonlai's strong knees buckle beneath his slim black slacks. One of his wide hands stiffened as if he were ready to catch her from falling. "Did you just not register your troops? Are you going to ambush us?" "No, dear God." Doria, the black-haired Duchess, looked at the floor, keeping her ankle loose to wiggle her foot. "Doria, you're going to be destroyed," Bonlai exclaimed, his royal violet glow flaring over his face in an uncouth display of emotion. The violet of his glow made the green of his eyes flare wonderfully in an unexpected blend that darkened his hair. It was a spectacle the Duchess suspected any woman would fall over themselves for. She nodded gently, her gaze roaming around the room, as long as she didn't have to look directly at Bonlai's concern. Yes, probably. I mean, that is how these things go. It's been that way for centuries." Bonlai, his stance wide, his long and thick arms outstretched, his jaw hanging open in disbelief. A servant glided to the side, careful not to spill the tray he was carrying over the gobsmacked Count. Doria plucked a triangular glass from the tray, gulping down the sparkling white wine in one swift motion. Her face flushed, and she kept her mouth closed as she swallowed hard. "Doria, Bonlai fumbled. "I think we're done here." "Bonlai." Doria turned her head. "I wish you a good death." As she turned, having given her old friend the traditional mingling goodbye, the Gosgorlim Count took her arm. Doria's eyes contracted, and her focus was evident. Cram inched closer to her, his arms tense at his sides as he stared over his Duchess's head at the Count. The crowd around them was staring. Their murmuring buzzing had silenced, eager to see something happen. "Doria, I can't just let you be killed," Bonlai said in a hush. Doria shook her head with a fraction of vibration, her eyes looking down at the Gosgorlim's hand on her bicep. "Are you seriously going to embarrass us both? You'll deny me my pride and my decency." Boney slowly relaxed his grip, letting Doria slip away. "I wish you a good death," he muttered. "Idiot." Doria sneered. Cram's arms relaxed, his watchful gaze lingering on Bonlai as Doria walked away, unhindered. Doria's pace quickened, though she gave her haste no mind. Her confidence that people would understand her desire to escape an awkward situation kept her focused as she made her way to the nearest wall. The lords of the 4 other houses waited for her with their backs to the wall. Enough space sat between them for their forces to gather beside them at their command. Doria nearly gasped at the sight of the most decorated and fanciest individuals at the gala. They greeted her shock with a collection of warm, inviting smiles, all except His Grace, Halmer, the stoic Duke of House Helvenhall. No matter how many times Doria met the Duke of Helvenhall, his ancient presence always managed to shake her soul. His regal grey eyes blackened and dimmed with age. His calcium strands had become thick and branched, carrying the weight of centuries in their knotted spindles and giving His Grace a majestic crown of antlers. The faint red glow of his soul pulsed in his calcium, paired with the brown and burgundy of his robes, giving him the mythical look of a spirit of autumn. His frown was the most prominent wrinkle on the death-defying angular face. The feature that had caught the Doska Duchess's envy, though, was the luscious sheen Halmer's age-defying ash-brown hair had managed to maintain since before her grandfather was born. Doria bowed to her fellow house heads, and Halmer gave her the most effortless tiny nod before resuming his watch of the crowd.